My house burned down in the middle of the night. Everything I owned, gone in a few hours. And at first, I thought it was just a terrible accident. But it wasn't. Because a few days before the fire, I had an argument with someone. Someone who had been watching me for weeks. Someone who kept showing up at my house, complaining about things that didn't even matter. She was part of the HOA. And she didn't like me. Not even a little. At the time, I thought she was just another annoying neighbor. Strict. Controlling. Obsessed with rules. I had no idea how far she was willing to go. Or how personal it had become. But here's the part that doesn't make sense. After the fire destroyed my house, I wasn't treated like a victim. I was treated like a suspect. And somehow, everything started pointing at me. But that's not even the craziest part. Because when I was standing in court, waiting to hear what would happen to me, she showed up. Not to help. Not to tell the truth. But to complain. I moved into that neighborhood because it looked quiet. Clean streets. Neat houses. Everything in place. The kind of place where nothing really goes wrong. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. I didn't think much about the HOA at first. I knew it existed. I knew there were rules. But I figured as long as I kept things normal, it wouldn't be a problem. And for the first few days, it wasn't. Then I met her. It happened in the simplest way. I was outside, unpacking a few boxes near my driveway. Just minding my own business. When I noticed someone standing across the street. Watching. At first, I thought she was just a neighbor. Curious. Trying to see who just moved in. So I gave a small wave. Trying to be friendly. She didn't wave back. Didn't smile. Didn't even react. She just kept staring. That was the first thing that felt off. A few minutes later, she walked over. Not slowly. Not casually. Direct. "You're new," she said. Not a question. A statement. I nodded. Told her I just moved in. She looked around my yard. Then at the house. Then back at me. "You'll need to fix that," she said. No explanation. No greeting. Just that. I paused for a second. "Fix what?" I asked. She pointed at a small stack of boxes near the garage. "Those can't stay there," she said. I almost laughed. Because I had just moved in. "I'm still unpacking," I told her. She didn't care. "HOA rules don't change just because you're new," she replied. That was my first real interaction with her. And something about it didn't sit right. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. Like she wasn't just informing me. She was enforcing something. Something she believed she controlled. I tried to keep it polite. Told her I'd take care of it soon. Just to end the conversation. But as she walked away, I noticed something. She turned back. Just for a second. And looked at the house again. Not like a neighbor. More like she was judging it. Evaluating it. And in that moment, I got the feeling this wasn't going to be a one-time thing. I just didn't know how far it would go. After that first interaction, I expected things to settle down. Maybe she was just strict. Maybe she liked things a certain way. I figured if I kept everything clean and followed basic rules, that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. The next day, I stepped outside and noticed something on my front door. A paper. Neatly taped. Violation notice. I stood there for a second, just staring at it. Because I had barely been there long enough to even unpack. I pulled it off and read it. It mentioned improper storage and visible clutter. They were talking about the boxes. The same ones I had told her about. I shook my head. because this felt unnecessary. Still, I didn't want problems. So I moved everything inside. Cleaned up the area. Made sure everything looked exactly how they would want it. Problem solved. Or at least, it should have been. But the next morning, there was another notice. Different reason. Same tone. Non-compliant exterior condition. I walked outside and looked around, trying to figure out what they were talking about. The lawn? It was cut. The driveway? Clear. Everything looked normal. That's when I saw her again. Standing across the street. Watching. I walked over this time. Didn't wait. What's the problem now? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Just looked at me with that same expression. Then she pointed at the side of my house. You need to repaint that section, she said. I looked over. There was a small area where the paint looked slightly faded. Nothing major. Something most people wouldn't even notice. I just moved in, I said. I'll get to it. She shook her head. No. It needs to be fixed immediately. Immediately. That word again. I could feel something building. Not just frustration. Something else. Is this really necessary? I asked. She stepped closer. Not aggressively. But enough to make it clear she wasn't backing down. This neighborhood has standards, she said. And you're not meeting them. I looked around again. At the houses. At the yards. At everything that looked identical. Then back at her. I'll handle it, I said. Trying to stay calm. But as I turned to walk back, she said something that stopped me. We'll make sure you do. Not a suggestion. Not advice. A statement. I turned back slowly. Looked at her. What does that mean? I asked. She didn't answer. Just gave a small smile. Then turned and walked away. That smile stayed with me. Because it didn't feel normal. It felt like she already knew something I didn't. And over the next few days, things didn't slow down. They escalated. More notices. More complaints. More things that didn't make sense. And every time I saw her, she was watching. Always watching. Like she was waiting for something. Or maybe are planning something. Over the next few days, it stopped feeling like normal HOA behavior. At first, it was just annoying. Now, it felt targeted. The notices didn't stop. They increased. Not just in number, but in tone. They started using stronger words. Immediate correction required. Final warning. Failure to comply will result in enforcement action. Every time I read one, I had the same thought. Enforcement how? Because none of it made sense. I wasn't breaking any real rules. Nothing serious. Nothing that justified this level of pressure. But they kept pushing. One afternoon, I came home and found something different. Not just a notice. A full letter. Printed. Formal. It listed multiple violations. Some of them were things I had already fixed. Others, I didn't even recognize. Unapproved exterior condition. Improper property appearance. Failure to maintain community standards. The wording felt vague. Almost like it was designed that way. At the bottom, there was a line that stood out. Continued non-compliance may result in further action. Further action. Again. I folded the paper slowly and went inside. Because now, this wasn't just about small complaints. It felt like something was building. That same evening, I noticed her again. Standing across the street. Same spot. Same posture. Watching. I didn't go over this time. I just stood there for a second. Then went inside. Because I wanted to see what she would do. And she didn't move. Not for a while. That alone felt strange. Most people wouldn't stand there that long. Not without a reason. The next morning, things got worse. I woke up to a knock on my door. Not light. Not polite. Loud. Repeated. I opened it and saw her standing there. With 2 other people. This time, she wasn't alone. They introduced themselves as part of the HOA board. More formal. More controlled. But the message was the same. They started talking about community impact. About how my property was affecting the neighborhood. About how I needed to comply. I let them speak. Didn't interrupt. Then I said the same thing I had been saying from the start. I'm taking care of everything. But that wasn't enough. One of them stepped forward. Calm voice. Measured tone. You've had multiple opportunities, he said. We expect full compliance immediately. Expect. Not request. That word changed everything. Because it showed exactly how they saw this situation. They didn't think they were asking. They thought they had authority. And standing there, looking at all 3 of them, I realized something important. This wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about control. And the way they were acting. They believed they already had it. That's when I noticed her again. Standing slightly behind them. Watching me. Not speaking. Just observing. And for a second, I saw it. Not anger. Not frustration. Something else. Satisfaction. Like everything was going exactly how she wanted. And that's when I started to understand this wasn't random. This wasn't just HOA pressure. This was personal. And whatever she was trying to do, she wasn't done yet. After that visit, I stopped thinking of it as normal HOA pressure. Because normal pressure doesn't feel like that. It doesn't follow you. It doesn't escalate that quickly. And it definitely doesn't feel personal. The next day, I noticed something new. Not a note. Not a warning. Something quieter. A car parked across the street. Engine off. Someone inside. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe just a neighbor. But when I stepped outside, I felt it. That same feeling. Like I was being watched. I moved around casually. Pretended not to notice. But every time I looked up, the car was still there. Later that day, it was gone. But the next morning, it came back. Different car. Same spot. That's when I knew. This wasn't random. Someone was paying attention. That same afternoon, I found another notice. But this one wasn't like the others. It was longer. More detailed. More aggressive. It listed violations I had never even heard of before. Things that didn't make sense. Things that weren't even visible. Improper structural condition. Failure to meet visual compliance standards. Non-approved exterior modifications. I stood there reading it, trying to figure out what any of it meant. Because none of it matched reality. At the bottom, there was something new. A deadline. 7 days. And under it, a line that made everything worse. Failure to comply may result in legal action. Legal action? Over what? I folded the paper slowly and went inside. Because now, this had crossed another line. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was about building pressure. And the more I thought about it, the more something became clear. They weren't trying to fix anything. They were trying to force something. That evening, I saw her again. Standing near the sidewalk. Talking to someone. As soon as she noticed me, she stopped. looked straight at me, didn't say anything, just stared. Then she said something to the person next to her. Quiet. But I could see it. They both looked toward my house. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just complaints anymore. This was attention. Focused. Consistent. Directed at me. Later that night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I went back through everything. The notices. The timing. The way things escalated. And it all pointed to one thing. This wasn't about the HOA. Not really. This was about her. And whatever problem she had with me, it wasn't going away. If anything, it was getting worse. And the way things were building, it didn't feel like it was going to stop at warnings. A few days later, everything felt off. Not loud. Not obvious. Just different. The note stopped. Completely. No new papers on the door. No warnings in the mailbox. Nothing. At first, that should have felt like relief. But it didn't. Because the silence didn't feel normal. It felt planned. I still saw her. But not like before. She wasn't coming up to the house anymore. She stayed across the street. Watching. Always watching. And every time I stepped outside, I could feel it. That same quiet pressure again. One afternoon, I noticed something else. Someone walking near the side of my house. Not her. Someone else. They didn't knock. Didn't call out. Just moved along the edge of the property like they were checking something. I stepped outside immediately. Walked around the side. By the time I got there, they were already gone. No explanation. No reason. Just gone. That moment stuck with me. Because now it wasn't just her. It was others. Which meant this had gone beyond one person. That same evening, I checked everything again. Doors. Windows. Locks. Everything was fine. Nothing out of place. But it still didn't feel right. That night, I couldn't sleep properly. Every small sound felt louder. Every movement outside felt noticeable. And sometime in the middle of the night, I smelled it. Smoke. At first, I thought it was nothing. Maybe something outside. Maybe a neighbor burning something. But then it got stronger. And that's when I heard it. A faint crackling sound. I got up immediately. Walked toward the hallway. The air felt thicker. Warmer. And then I saw it. Light. Flickering from the other side of the house. Not normal light. Orange. Moving. Fire. Everything happened fast after that. I ran toward the door. Grabbed what I could. Didn't even think. The heat was building. The smoke was spreading. And within minutes, it was out of control. I stepped outside and turned back for a second. And what I saw didn't feel real. The house was already burning. Flames moving through it faster than I expected. Too fast. Like it had started suddenly. Not slowly. Not by accident. People started coming out. Neighbors. Watching. Calling for help. And then, I saw her. Standing across the street. Same spot as always. Watching. Not panicking. Not reacting like everyone else. Just standing there. Looking at the fire. And for a second, it didn't look like shock. It looked like something else. Something I couldn't explain. And that's when the thought hit me. This wasn't random. And whatever was happening, it had started long before the fire. The fire spread faster than anything I had ever seen. Within minutes, the entire front of the house was covered in flames. There was no time to think. No time to understand what was happening. Just noise. Heat. Movement everywhere. Neighbors started gathering. Some of them shouting. Some calling emergency services. Others just standing there, watching. I stood a few steps back, trying to process it. Trying to understand how this even started. Because nothing about it felt normal. The way it moved. The speed. The way it jumped from one part of the house to another. It didn't feel like something that started by accident. Then the sirens came. Loud. Cutting through everything. Fire trucks pulled up. People moved back. More shouting. More movement. I stayed where I was. Watching. Watching my house burn. And through all of it, I saw her again. Still standing there. Same spot. She hadn't moved. Not when the fire started. Not when people began running around. Not even when the trucks arrived. Just watching. That was the part one couldn't ignore. Because everyone else reacted. Everyone else moved. Everyone else showed something. But she didn't. And the way she was looking at it, it didn't feel like surprise. It felt expected. I looked away for a second. Trying not to think like that. Trying to stay focused on what was happening. But every time I looked back, she was still there. Same posture. Same expression. Eventually, the fire started coming under control. Not gone. But contained. The damage was already done. Most of the house was gone. Everything inside, gone with it. I stood there, not really moving. Not really thinking clearly. And that's when someone came up to me. One of the responders. Asking questions. Simple ones at first. Were you inside? Did you see how it started? I answered what I could. But the truth was, I didn't know. I hadn't seen anything. Just the smoke. Then the fire. Then everything else. But as I was answering, I noticed something else. More people arriving. Not fire trucks. Not emergency vehicles. Police? That alone didn't feel strange at first. It made sense. But then I saw how they were moving. Not just toward the house. Toward me. That's when something shifted again. One of them approached. Calm. Professional. Asked for my name. Basic information. Then something different. Where were you before the fire started? That question felt off. Not because it was unusual, but because of the way it was asked. Careful. Focused. Like they were already looking for something. I answered. Told them the truth. But I could feel it. The direction of the conversation. It wasn't just about the fire anymore. It was about me. And as I stood there, looking at what was left of my house, I realized something I hadn't even considered before. This wasn't just a disaster. It was the beginning of something else. Something I wasn't ready for. And whatever it was already moving forward. They didn't treat me like someone who had just lost everything. That was the first thing I noticed. Not sympathy. Not concern. Just questions. At first, they were simple. Where I was. What I saw. When I noticed the smoke. I answered everything honestly. Because I didn't have anything to hide. But then the questions changed. Was there anything unusual happening recently? Any disputes with neighbors? Any reason someone might target your property? That last one stayed with me. Because I hadn't even said anything yet. I hesitated for a second. Then I mentioned her. The complaints. The visits. The pressure. I didn't accuse her of anything. I just explained what had been happening. They listened. But their expressions didn't change. No reaction. No follow-up questions about her. Instead, they asked something else. Have you made any changes to the house recently? I frowned. No, I said. They wrote something down. Then another question. Any electrical issues? Any repairs? I shook my head. No, and that's when I felt it. The shift. Subtle. But real. The direction of the conversation. It wasn't moving toward her. It was moving toward me. I looked at one of the officers, trying to read his expression. But it was neutral. Careful. Like he was following a process. Then he asked the question that made everything clear. Do you have insurance on the property? I paused. Not because I didn't understand the question, but because I understood what it meant. Yes, I said slowly. He nodded. Wrote something down. And in that moment, everything felt different. Because now it wasn't just about what happened. It was about why it happened. And who they thought was responsible. I looked back at the house. Or what was left of it. Still smoking. Still damaged beyond anything I could fix. And somehow, I wasn't being treated like someone who lost a home. I was being treated like someone who might have caused it. That didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. But the more they asked, the clearer it became. They were building something. A story. And I was at the center of it. Later that day, they asked me to come in. Just to go over a few more things. Routine, they said. But it didn't feel routine. Not anymore. Because now, I wasn't just dealing with what had happened. I was dealing with how it was being seen. And as I walked away from what used to be my house, one thought kept repeating in my head. This wasn't going in the direction it should have. Not at all. And somehow, everything was starting to point at me. The next few days didn't feel real. I wasn't at home anymore. Because there was no home left to go back to. Just a damaged structure, blocked off, with people coming and going. Inspecting. Documenting. Looking for answers. I stayed somewhere temporary. Close enough to keep track of things. But far enough that I didn't have to see it constantly. Still, it followed me. Every thought. Every moment. Because nothing about it made sense. And the more time passed, the worse it got. The questions didn't stop. They increased. Calls. Visits. More requests to come in and clarify things. Every time, it felt less like a conversation and more like an investigation. They asked about my schedule. My habits. Where I was before the fire. What I did that day. Same questions. Different ways. Trying to find something. And every time I answered, I could feel it. They weren't just listening. They were comparing. Looking for gaps. Something that didn't match. That's when it hit me. They weren't trying to understand what happened. They were trying to confirm something. Something they had already started believing. And I didn't know why. One afternoon, I went back near the property. Just to see it again. From a distance. It looked worse than I remembered. Burned. Dark. Empty. And standing there. I saw her again. Karen. Near the sidewalk. Same place she always stood. Looking at the house. I stopped. Didn't move closer. Just watched. She didn't see me at first. Or maybe she did. Because after a few seconds, she turned slightly. And looked straight in my direction. No surprise. No confusion. Just that same expression. Calm. Controlled. Then she turned away. And walked off. Like nothing had happened. Like none of this affected her. That moment stayed with me. Because it didn't match the situation. Anyone else would have reacted differently. Concern. Shock. Something. But not her. Never her. Later that day, I got another call. They wanted me to come in again. Just to go over a few details. Same words. Different tone. And this time, it felt heavier. More serious. Like they were getting closer to something. Or maybe they thought they already had it. When I got there, the questions changed again. Less open. More direct. Focused. And as I sat there, answering them, I realized something I hadn't fully accepted yet. This wasn't just an investigation anymore. It was a case. And somehow, I wasn't just part of it. I was the center of it. The questions didn't stop after that. They became more focused. More direct. Less about understanding, more about confirming. They started asking about things I hadn't even considered. Were you under any financial pressure? Did you have any issues with the property? Were there any recent changes to your insurance? Each question felt like it was leading somewhere. Like they already had a path, and they were trying to fit me into it. I answered everything the same way. Honestly. Clearly. But it didn't seem to change anything. Because no matter what I said, they kept coming back to the same idea. Motive. That word showed up again and again. Not directly. But in the way they asked things. In the way they looked at me. They weren't asking what happened. They were asking why I would do it. That's when it really started to sink in. They thought I was responsible. Not just a possibility. Not just a question. A real possibility. And the more time passed, the more it felt like they were building something around that. I tried to push back. Told them about the situation with the HOA. About Karen. About everything that had been happening before the fire. But every time I brought her up, the response was the same. We'll look into that. No follow-up. No real interest. Just noted. And then back to me. That was the part that didn't make sense. Because she was there. Before the fire. During the fire. After the fire. Always there. But somehow, she wasn't the focus. I was. Days turned into weeks. The process kept moving forward. Slow. Heavy. And every step felt like it was going in the wrong direction. Then one day, everything changed. I got the call. Not a request this time. Not a question. A decision. They had enough. That's what they said. Enough to move forward. Enough to take action. And just like that, it became official. Charges. Real. Serious. I remember sitting there, holding the phone, trying to process it. Because it didn't feel real. Not after everything that had happened. Not after what I saw. Not after the way things built up. But none of that mattered now. Because once it reached that point, everything changed. It wasn't about proving what happened anymore. It was about defending myself. Against something I didn't do. And the worst part. She was still out there. Still walking around. Still acting like nothing had happened. While I was the one being pulled into something I never should have been part of. And the more I thought about it, the more one question kept coming back. How did it get to this point? How did everything turn around so completely that I went from losing my house to losing control of what happened next? By the time it reached court, everything felt distant. Like I was watching it happen from the outside. The room was quiet. Not completely silent, but controlled. Every movement felt measured. Every word carried weight. I sat there, listening. Trying to stay focused. Trying to keep everything clear in my head. Because now every detail mattered. The fire. The timeline. The questions. Everything they had built over the past weeks. And the way it was being presented, it sounded convincing. That was the part that made it worse. Because even though I knew the truth, the way they explained it made it feel like something else. Like I had a reason. Like I had a motive. I sat there, hearing it all, and thinking about how easily things can be shaped. How quickly something real can be turned into something different. Then, in the middle of it, something unexpected happened. The door opened. And she walked in. Karen. Just like that. No hesitation. No concern. She didn't look around. Didn't seem out of place. She walked in like she belonged there. And for a second, everything felt off again. Because this wasn't her space. But she acted like it was. She took a seat. Not quietly. Not carefully. Just sat down. Then she started talking. Not to me. Not to the people asking questions. Just talking. Complaining. About the neighborhood. About the property. About how things had been handled. Like the fire, like everything that happened, was just another inconvenience to her. I sat there, listening. Trying to understand why she was even there. Because this wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This was something bigger. But she didn't act like it. She acted like she was still in control. Still part of something she could manage. And the more she spoke, the more something became clear. She wasn't careful. She wasn't thinking about how things sounded. She was just saying what she believed. And that's when it started to shift. Slowly. Subtly. But enough to notice. Because the way she described things, the way she talked about the property, it didn't match the story that had been built around me. It didn't fit. And for the first time since this started, the attention in the room changed. Not completely. But enough. Because now, there was something else to look at. Something that hadn't been there before. And as she kept talking, without realizing it, she was starting to open something. Something that had been overlooked. Something that didn't make sense before. But now, it was starting to. The more she spoke, the harder it became to ignore. At first, it just sounded like complaints. The same tone she always used. Talking about standards. About appearances. About how things should be. But then, she went further. She started talking about the house. My house. Not like someone describing what they saw. But like someone describing what they knew. Specific details. Timing. Structure. Things that didn't match what had been presented before. And the more she talked, the more people in the room started paying attention. Not just listening. Watching her. Because something didn't line up. She mentioned areas of the house that weren't visible from the street. Spoke about the layout. The inside. Like she had seen it. Up close. More than once. That alone was enough to shift the room. Because before that moment, everything had been focused on me. Now there was another direction. Another possibility. She didn't notice at first. She kept talking. Kept explaining. Kept complaining. Like she was still in control of the situation. But she wasn't. Because every word she said was building something else. Something she didn't realize. One of the officials leaned forward slightly. Asked her a simple question. How do you know that? That's when she paused. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because up until that point, she had been confident. Now there was hesitation. Not panic. Not fear. But a break in the rhythm. She tried to explain it. Said she had seen it during inspections. During visits. But that didn't match the earlier statements. Because those visits weren't supposed to happen. Not inside. Not without permission. And now that detail mattered. The room shifted again. More questions. More focus. Not on me anymore. On her. And the more they asked, the more difficult it became for her to keep the story straight. Small contradictions. Things that didn't align. Details that didn't match the timeline. Each one small on its own. But together, they changed everything. I sat there, listening. Not speaking. Not reacting. Because for the first time, I didn't have to. The direction had changed. The weight had moved. And the more she tried to hold on to control, the more it slipped. Until finally, she stopped talking. Not because she wanted to. Because she had nothing left to say that made sense. And in that silence, everything that had been building for weeks shifted completely. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just clear. For the first time since this started, it wasn't about defending myself anymore. It was about what she had revealed. And what that meant moving forward. After that moment, the room didn't feel the same. No one said it out loud. But the focus had shifted. The questions that followed were different. Slower. More precise. They weren't directed at me anymore. They were directed at her. She tried to stay composed. Tried to answer carefully. But something had already changed. The confidence she walked in with wasn't there anymore. Now, every question seemed to catch her slightly off guard. How often were you on the property? Were you ever inside the house? Did you have permission to be there? Simple questions. But they carried weight. And the more she answered, the more things didn't line up. At one point, she said she had only seen the house from outside. But then she mentioned details that couldn't be seen from the street. She corrected herself quickly. Tried to adjust. But it was too late. Because once something like that happens, people start paying closer attention. Every word. Every pause. Every change. And now, they were watching her the same way she used to watch me. Carefully. Looking for something that didn't fit. I sat there, quiet. Just listening. Because this was the first time since everything started that I wasn't the one being examined. And it felt strange. Not relief. Not yet. Just different. At one point, she tried to bring the conversation back. Tried to talk about the condition of my property again. About how it didn't meet standards. About how it was affecting the neighborhood. But it didn't land the same way anymore. Because now, those words didn't matter. What mattered was how she knew what she knew. And why she had been there. So many times. Without permission. The more she spoke, the more it became clear that she hadn't just been complaining. She had been involved. In ways she couldn't explain properly. In ways she probably didn't expect to have to explain at all. And that's what changed everything. Because once that door opened, it couldn't be closed again. They started asking about the timeline. Where she was that night. What she saw. What she did. Her answers became shorter. Less certain. And for the first time, there was hesitation in her voice. Not just a pause. Real hesitation. Because now, it wasn't about control. It was about explanation. And explanations are harder when the truth isn't simple. I looked at her for a second. The same person who stood outside my house, giving orders, leaving notes, watching everything. Now sitting there, trying to keep everything together. And it didn't match. Because the confidence was gone. Replaced by something else. Something quieter. Something uncertain. And as the questions kept coming, the direction became clearer. Not fully. Not completely. But enough. Enough to see where this was going. Enough to understand that things were no longer moving the way they had before. And for the first time since that night, it felt like something real was finally being uncovered. The room stayed quiet after that. Not completely silent, but different. Like everyone was processing the same thing at the same time. No one rushed to speak. No one tried to move things forward quickly. Because now the direction had changed. The questions that followed weren't random anymore. They were focused. Careful. And every one of them pointed in the same direction. Toward her. She tried to answer. Tried to stay consistent. But it was getting harder. Every response felt delayed. Every explanation needed adjustment. And the more she spoke, the clearer it became. Things didn't line up. Not just small details. Important ones. Where she was. When she was there. What she saw. Each answer added something new. Something that didn't match what had already been said. And once that starts happening, it doesn't stop. Because now people listen differently. They don't just hear the words. They look for what doesn't fit. I stayed quiet. Didn't interrupt. Didn't react. Because I didn't need to anymore. Everything was happening on its own. At one point, someone asked her directly about that night. Simple question. Clear. Were you near the property? She hesitated. Not long. But enough. Then she answered. But it wasn't direct. It was vague. Careful. And that hesitation said more than anything else. Because before that moment, she had been certain. Now there was doubt. And once doubt shows up, everything changes. More questions followed. More pressure. Not aggressive. Not loud. Just steady. And that steady pressure started breaking things down. Piece by piece. Until the story she had been holding onto didn't hold anymore. I could see it in the way she looked around. Not confident anymore. Not in control. Searching. For something to hold onto. But there was nothing left. Because everything she had said, everything she had built, was now being questioned. Not by me. By everyone. And that's what made it different. Because once that happens, it doesn't go back. I looked down for a second. Then back up. The same room. The same people. But everything felt different now. Because for the first time since this started, I wasn't being pulled into something. I was stepping out of it. And whatever was happening next was no longer about defending myself. It was about what had already been revealed. And how far it was going to go.